Hello, everyone. I'm Dan.
And I'm Austin.
And we're here to talk about games.
Badly?
Correct. Good to see you all. Today, we're going to dive into one of the most ambitious and perhaps convoluted lore-heavy games to ever be released, Xenogears. I've been very excited about this particular retrospective for a while. As with our previous retrospective, we won't be covering just the game itself, but its development history and the ridiculously complex world building underlying this incredibly ambitious game.
Yeah, this game is absolutely huge. Not just from like the perspective of plot and mechanics, but also in like what it explores, right? So you've got psychology, religion, philosophy, existential dread, all crammed in together into like this one experience.
Exactly. This game is so big and it's so complex that we have elected to cover this game in multiple parts rather than all at once. Right. It is important to us that we unravel this incredible game into something digestible so you can appreciate it as much as we do. With that said, let's get started with where it all began. And just a fair warning, there are major spoilers for the entire story of Xenogears. Yeah, the whole world, the whole story. So if you do want to experience the game first, we have a great playthrough up on the channel. Go check it out. Or give the game a play yourself. I do highly recommend it, especially if you like turn-based RPGs.
Or both.
Or do both, exactly. Yeah. Give it a play. Maybe play it concurrently with our playthrough. There are a lot of playthroughs of this game on YouTube, but of course ours is the best.
Right.
We're
desperate.
That's
what?
right.
I didn't say nothing. What?
I didn't hear anything. Yeah. Without further ado, we'll get into the development history first. I did talk about this a little bit in our playthrough, so it might be a little bit of repetition, but we're going to be a little more detailed here because the development history is really critical to understanding Xenogears.
Right.
So Xenogears was originally conceived by Soria Saga as a story about a young soldier of fortune with multiple personalities. She and her soon-to-be husband, Tetsuya Takahashi, were both veterans of Squaresoft for their work on Final Fantasy, among other series at Squaresoft. They have an extensive set of credentials there. Mm-hmm. They would go on to fully script and lead the project. Takahashi in particular was known internally in Square for having a bold, uncompromising vision. He was seen as someone who was incredibly passionate, but also willing to push ideas way beyond what Square would usually greenlight.
Right, and together they would actually eventually start up what we know as Monolith Soft now, right? Which is a team of developers who have worked on several games that you actually are probably familiar with, whether you realize it or not. Like, while they're most known for games like Xenogears and Xenosaga, and of course, Xenoblade Chronicles, if Xeno is in it, they've probably had their hand in it. But they've also had a hand in development of other games, such as Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom as well. And there's all kinds of rumors out there right now about them working with Team Zelda for more stuff in the future as well. So, like, just to name a few things, it's a very big arsenal of works that they've done. So, yeah.
So, with regards to Xenogears, before receiving the formal title of the game as Xenogears, this was originally a story pitched for Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, which obviously didn't pan out to be the case, because that's not what we got for Final Fantasy VII.
Exactly. So instead, it was reworked as a direct sequel to Chrono Trigger under the name Project Noah. However, Square ultimately rejected the entire thing because it was considered to be too dark and complicated at the time. This was happening right as Square was transitioning from being a Nintendo IP to the Sony PlayStation. So, instead of killing the idea entirely, they allowed Takahashi and Saga to turn it into its own brand new original sci-fi work.
Right, which...
Fortunately for us.
Yeah, of course. And interestingly, unlike most game development, as far as I'm aware, at least I should clarify. They wrote this entire screenplay up front, right? Xenogears was built around the story first, and then the gameplay came after, second, which is usually it's the reverse from what I've seen. You typically work on mechanics and then you develop the story narrative once you've got your idea narrowed down. So I thought that was a really interesting approach.
Right. Yeah, they certainly had a unique approach when developing this game. Xenogears was released between Final Fantasy VII and VIII, which happened to also be right in the middle of a major internal identity crisis at Square. There was a clash in progress between the desire for classic fantasy, but also a push for modern aesthetics by well-known directors like Nomura and Katase. During this time, Xenogears kind of sat off to the side, but it was heavily supported by Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was one of the main reasons these experimental creators could push their projects forward, while Square focused primarily on the Final Fantasy series. So, as you can tell, this is a very unique project, just in circumstance alone.
Right, yeah. And, of course, as we talked about before, there are several themes and influences that we will talk about ad nauseum as we grow forward, right? And we'll continue to talk about it at length because of how complex Xenogears is. But it is influenced by so many sources, right? We have everything from anthropology, psychology, religion, science, philosophy, and they're all wrapped up in this sci-fi setting. And then along with this, we have the specific works of Freud and Jung and Lacan, and especially Nietzsche, who we actually see Takahashi directly referenced later in the subtitles of the Xenosaga trilogy, which is also something that we've covered when we started playing Xenosaga 1 and 2, and we'll talk about it again, I'm sure, when we hit 3. So, along with all of that, there's also the focus of Gnosticism and even Jewish mysticism.
That's right. It's also heavily influenced by Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, as well as Star Wars and 2001: A Space Odyssey, among other smaller sources, a little bit less influential, but still, just everything is included here. It's got this rich sci-fi pedigree.
Right, and of course, we can't forget Gundam. His love for giant robots should not be understated.
That's right, Takashi and all of his Gundams in his office. It's very commonly known around that time.
Yeah.
So before we dive into the game itself, it's important that the world of Xenogears be understood in kind of broad terms. So I want to talk about the structure of the world. Using Perfect Works as a reference, the world of Xenogears is composed of 6 episodes, which are divided into 3 sections. The first section contains Episode 1, the second contains Episode 2 through 5, and the final section contains Episode 6, which is largely unknown. The creators describe Xenogears as light reflecting off a mirror, but the mirror is broken. Each shard reflects part of the truth, and only by looking at all of them can you get an idea of the full picture and kind of the underlying truth of this story in this world.
Right, and because this is such a complex game, we are dividing into parts, we said, and so we'll be spending the rest of this particular episode breaking down Section 1 and a part of Section 2, all the way up to Episode 5, I believe is when we'll stop. So buckle up, it's gonna be a ride. Hope you got your snacks and your popcorn, because we're going.
Yep, let's go. Yeah, like Austin said, we are going to go right up to the start of the game, and if you want the game covered in retrospective, that's going to be in the next episode.
Right. Stay tuned for part 2.
That's right. We're excited for this series. So to kind of get into Section 1 here, we're going to start with Section 1, Episode 1, which is called in Perfect Works the Interplanetary War. So if we look at the world of Xenogears from this perspective, it really kind of starts out with an artifact being discovered around 15,000 years before the start of the game, in 2001 AD, and that would be our timeline, of course.
Right.
So deep beneath Earth's geological strata, scientists uncover this object whose existence appears to be impossible by current scientific understanding. This ancient object emits a powerful magnetic field, resists all known analysis, and appears to predate Earth's existence itself. Since no one knows what else to call it, it becomes labeled as magnetic abnormal matter, or MAM for short.
Yeah, the more I read that, the more it just kind of feels like the scientific equivalent of saying, this is a thingamabob, like just sticking that on the label with a title pending attached to it.
Exactly. That's pretty much what it was. Nobody really knew what this thing was other than it had abnormal magnetic waves coming out of it. As research on the object continued, it becomes clear that MAM might actually be older than the universe itself, dating back nearly 15 billion years. With this discovery, the artifact slowly stops being treated as a scientific anomaly and becomes more of a religious icon.
Thus, MAM earns its name as Zohar, the province of God.
Exactly, and we'll talk a little more about the name Zohar in a little bit here, but yeah, it's a very, very important name and the starting point to understand kind of this world.
Right.
To that end, there is a theory that arises about the Zohar that proposes that it may be responsible for life itself, shifting the predominant understanding of life's origin from natural selection-based evolution to artificial panspermia. Panspermia being the idea that life did not naturally evolve on Earth, but was intentionally seeded. Life here came from out there.
Right.
This discovery and this theory completely changes the framework in which we evaluate humanity. We being, humanity itself, how we evaluate ourselves.
Right.
We're not a cosmic accident. We are, in fact, a result of some sort of intelligent design.
Right. So even before the game begins, we're already having to ask tough questions, right? If life was created intentionally, what is the purpose behind it?
Exactly. The province of God, indeed. So as this continues, we don't really know a lot of what happens in the intervening 5 to 6 centuries, but by the early 26th century, humanity has made a breakthrough that changes everything. Intergalactic spaceflight.
And just to make sure you didn't miss that, intergalactic means travel between galaxies, not just between star systems, which is insane just to think about being able to travel that far. Like we have trouble trying to travel interplanetary in our own solar system, and they're going between galaxies. This also acts as like a mark to the end of the AD calendar as we know it. Humanity instead begins marking their time using the moniker Transcend Christ Era, or TC for short. And if it wasn't clear by that name, I should say, you should begin to kind of see how the lines between science and religion are already blurring at this point in human progress.
That's right, yeah. Intergalactic travel and Transcend Christ Era, we're seeing humanity really being elevated to another level by this discovery of the Zohar. Not long after that, humanity begins a massive evacuation project known as the Immigrant Fleet. They are leaving Earth behind en masse at this point, and Earth is declared as an inviolable, forbidden place, and no one is allowed to return there. During this period, Earth becomes known as Lost Jerusalem. As for why exactly this happens, it is not known in the material of Perfect Works. We will talk a little more about this once we discuss Xenosaga, because if you know Xenosaga, this is probably all sounding very familiar.
Yeah.
But as far as Xenogears goes, we don't know why you can't go back to Earth. You just can't.
Right, and I guess that kind of goes back to our statement ages ago when we talked about how Xenogears acts as a foundation in a lot of ways to the Xenosaga series because they pull from a lot of the same sources.
Exactly.
And so this Lost Jerusalem, right? It could be that Earth is an Eden humanity was exiled from, or it could be that something so horrific happened that even speaking of it is a problem, right? The answer is kind of left deliberately unclear at this point.
Yep, we just don't know. What we do know, though, is after wandering for about 250 years in the Immigrant Fleet, a habitable planet is finally discovered in the M24 Archer constellation. This is a system that is roughly 10,000 light years from Earth, so for a civilization that is capable of intergalactic travel, it's kind of around the corner, but they do finally find it.
It's a staggering distance.
Yeah, it's a massive different distance. Of course, if you compare it to the distance to another galaxy, it's not far at all.
Hooray, universal shrink.
That's right.
Oh, man.
But yeah, this planet ends up being named Neo Jerusalem. So we've gone from Lost Jerusalem, Earth, to Neo Jerusalem. And from this planet, humanity establishes the Star Cluster Federation. And from there, they begin to expand outward into the galaxy. Despite the incredible technological growth during the time, humanity's spiritual development stagnates. For the next 4,500 years, humanity wages war across the stars. Empires rise, fracture, and fall. Pirates, rival states, and political schisms escalate into full galactic conflict. Era of strife, Intergalactic War.
Yeah. And then around 47, 43 TC, the Zohar is rediscovered, right? Because at this point, it was thought lost. The relic from Lost Jerusalem appears aboard a museum ship of all things that belonged to the Pilgrim fleet. It's possible that it was a remnant from the original immigrant fleet. We don't really know. But it is safe to say that in no insignificant way, humanity had been unknowingly carrying God, and I'm using quotes here, with them into space. And since humans were now far more advanced, analysis of this artifact begins again with more success because they're more advanced, right? So this leads to the theory of the phenomenal phase shift, which is the idea that reality itself can be altered at its most fundamental level.
Right. This is the birth of the modern, as far as this time period is concerned, Project Zohar.
Right.
And the birth of Deus. So this research becomes a much deeper study as it goes on. And as it's named Project Zohar, it continues until about 4765 TC. In this year, there is a mysterious accident that causes the destruction of an entire planet. But despite the setback, they recover the Zohar and resume the project, eventually developing the ultimate weapon.
Right. And not just any weapon, because why would it ever be just any weapon? It's a living weapon, and they dubbed it the Deus system.
Right. Deus is completed in 4766 TC, so they complete it pretty quickly. At its core is the Zohar, acting as an infinite energy engine that requires some form of control. And so we talk about this some in Perfect Works, where
Right.
the Zohar does not have any sort of will of its own. It is just an object that seems to have infinite energy to it. So, in order to use it, a conscious biological supercomputer named Kadamini was created as the control system for the Zohar and for Deus. Kadamini was capable of logical and intuitive thought, and it utilized the Zohar for incredible feats, up to and including creating life itself.
Which, as you might surmise, that ability alone has the potential to create some very big problems. And it will, as we'll see in the future.
And right now.
Yes. Yes.
So, speaking of the first major problem that occurs from this setup, in 4767 TC, so another year later, during an experiment near the planet Mictum 04 Beta, located in the NGC 6744 galaxy, which is 30.98 million light years distant from the Milky Way, the Deus system goes catastrophically out of control and invades a nearby colony. The casualties of this are staggering.
Yeah, and in the midst of all this tragedy, there's an unusual event that occurs as well. The Zohar reaches beyond our known reality, and in an attempt to acquire the energy it needed, this artifact comes in contact with a primordial being that is known only as the Wave Existence. For all intents and purposes, it is a god with no body, composed entirely of waves. Now, however, it has become trapped. Quite literally, it is a ghost within the machine.
Right. And, speaking of the catastrophe we're talking about here, in general, the Wave Existence is at the heart of this. Why did the weapon go out of control?
Right.
Well, it contacted a higher dimension, and now it's acting on its own.
Right.
And now we have this wave existence, this non-corporeal entity, this god, if you will, trapped in what is termed a cage of fleshly existence, the Zohar.
Right.
In the aftermath of this calamity, 1.2 million survivors are evacuated aboard the super space cruiser Eldridge. And I just love the term super space cruiser. It's great. Yeah, this ship is massive. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is a massive ship. And we're going to talk about how big it is in a little bit here. But yeah, it is super space cruiser indeed. On board this ship, we have the survivors and we have this dismantled weapon. Deus is dismantled into its cores, which are physically separated in order to make sure it stays inactive. However, during transit, Deus reactivates. The Zohar separates from Deus and it hijacks the Eldridge's AI, Raziel. With Deus in control, the Eldridge sets course for Lost Jerusalem, engaging its FTL drive. The ship's weapon systems are also turned on the human population, eradicating them. If you've seen the intro of Xenogears, you've seen this happen.
Right, yep. So, as you can imagine, this is a really big problem, right? Not only has Deus just devastated an entire planet when it lost control, but now it's headed to Lost Jerusalem, which a place, if you recall, has been inaccessible for over 4,700 years. Humanity was forbidden from returning.
Exactly. So, as this ship is doing this, the commanding officer, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to pronounce this guy's name right, it is Colonel Higayoshi Inoue.
Right.
I believe I pronounced that right, or at least close. An effort was made. But he's the commander of the Eldridge, and he attempts every possible countermeasure he can conceive, up to including cutting off the cables that control all of this physically.
Right.
But unfortunately, nothing works. So, without any alternatives, he evacuates the ship and he initiates a full structural separation. Basically, he engages the self-destruct system of this supercruiser. He would rather sacrifice the Eldridge than let Deus achieve its goals and reach what they call the main planet in the intro, Lost Jerusalem.
Understandably.
So because of this, of course, the Eldridge loses its displacement capability and it comes in contact with a gravity well of an unknown planet, crashing.
Right. Yep. And so, coming as no surprise, everyone dies, except one. A boy named Abel is the sole survivor, and he ends up becoming the foundation for everything that unfolds in Xenogears.
Right. Now it all begins. So this really concludes Section 1, and as we close it out, as you can tell, the consequences of this episode are far-reaching, and there's still much to discuss. One might say that humanity's greatest sin has just fallen from the sky. So in Section 2, we're going to shift from talking about the God among the stars to God's presence among humans.
Right.
So this starts Section 2, which is more of a planetary focus. We're focused on this planet that the Eldridge crashed on. This is the setting for Xenogears, but there's still much to cover before we get to the game.
There is so much.
Yeah, so moving from intergalactic travel, the discovery of an ancient godlike artifact and an interstellar war that led to this terrible weapon. We're now just on this planet. This is our focus, and we're gonna start getting into kind of early planetary history here. And so this is basically year 0 at this point on this planet. The DC scale doesn't matter anymore.
Just toss that out the window. If you feel like there's a lot to wrap your head around, then feel free to take a break. Because again, I know we've only been talking for about 20 or so minutes, but that was the preamble, and now we're going to be getting really deep into it. So grab a notebook, whatever you need to do, right? It's only going to get more complex the further we go. So if you need to take a moment, by all means, pause. We'll be here. I promise. We won't go anywhere.
Yes, indeed. But, okay, so without further ado, we're going to expound on a couple of things before we get back into history. So we're about, 5,300 years post 2001. when it all started.
Sure, yeah.
But as things begin on this planet, let's talk about the Eldridge first. So, like I mentioned, it was enormous. It was over 100 kilometers long, which is gigantic,
yes,
as far as ships go. So because of its size, it was divided into these independent blocks designed to function separately in case of emergencies. So as the ship is torn apart in Colonel Inoue's final maneuver, these sections fall to the planet's surface in different regions, and each one becomes a seed for future civilizations on the planet.
Right. So first up, we have the front block known as Babel, and that's something that will come up again, so keep that locked in your mind. It carries this very large, massive bay that holds a heavy load vehicle. It ends up soft landing and eventually becomes Babel Tower, but, like I said, we'll cover that more later. This heavy load vehicle later will become known as Shavat, a floating city that retains fragments of advanced technology. So, in essence, one of the crash sites becomes the route for one of the most technologically advanced civilizations on the planet.
Right. The middle block, Mahanan, also achieves a soft landing. It contains the ship's AI, which I mentioned before, Raziel, along with vast records of the Deus system, as well as humanity's long history. These records are literally alien knowledge to the natural and artificial life forms of this planet, and we will see this knowledge be weaponized repeatedly throughout history by those that control it.
Right, which is very parallel to our own history. The rest of the wreckage does not survive the crash in the same way. It gets scavenged over the centuries. Some of it becomes attack land cruisers, such as the Excalibur and the Yggdrasil. Or, just as notably, they get cobbled together in what we know as gears, which, as you're looking at gears, that is where that major Gundam influence I mentioned before is coming into play.
Right. Gears are large humanoid machines made from the wreckage of the Eldridge. They are powered by energy systems that mirror human will, called slave generators.
Right. So let's talk about Deus a little bit more in detail, right? The main body of Deus is classified as Omega-1. It's sealed within the attack mothership of Merkava, which itself is a living weapon designed to self-repair. It can deploy autonomous combat units known as Angels, each acting as a mobile terminal interface. I know that's a lot of jargon. Just hold on. The Zohar remains an infinite energy source, but it has no will of its own, which we talked about before, which means it responds to commands.
Right. And to continue with the jargon,
Yes.
So we have mentioned Kodamini and talked about it a little bit already, but just as a reminder, it is a crucial part of the Deus system. It is the biological supercomputer that is embedded in the eye of the Zohar. It performs both logical and intuitive processing using living elements. It can also create life and does so through those elements. So what are those elements? The core living program of Kodamini is called Persona, and that is a program that incarnates its will into the first human created on this planet, named Elohim, or Elohim. She is literally Persona, and is intended to carry out Kodamini's will, containing multiple survival subroutines, most notably System Hala.
Right. And System Hala is what enables human creation on a mass scale. So to be specific, it manufactures humans. Like, just churns them out like a factory. The personification of this system is actually known as Mia or Myong, and she is quite literally the mother of humanity.
Right. The other two living elements of the system are Anima, which we come to know in the game as Anima Relics, and Animus. So Anima are a set of organic components that comprise basically the pieces of the biological computer Kodamini. They were scattered across the planet during the crash and are capable of transforming gears into omnigears, which we will talk about later. Animus, by contrast, is the neurological counterpart to Anima. This factor is inherited by certain humans, designed to guide humanity back toward the reassembly of Deus.
Right. And at the heart of all of this is also the wave existence, a true primordial and transcendent being that lacks a three-dimensional material body and is composed entirely of waves, whatever that means. Who knows? Because of the Zohar's ability to transfer energy from different dimensions and the just enormous energy requirements to power the Deus weapon, it contacted this higher dimension. And this resulted in the wave existence falling into the lower dimension to avoid creating a crisis and becoming trapped inside the Zohar.
So, if that's a little confusing, just to elaborate here.
Don't worry, we're confused too sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. What does it mean for something like this? It's a higher dimensional entity made of waves. So to be trapped in the Zohar means the wave existence is also in contact with the Deus system. It uses this contact to interface with Kodamini and use every tool at its disposal to accomplish one thing: to return to its home dimension, composed entirely of waves. So think of it like if we're three-dimensional entities and if we fell to two dimensions. That's sort of what happened here. Of course, it's a lot more complex than that because we're talking much higher order beings. But what matters to us, essentially, in this universe, is the will of the wave existence and the will of Deus are competing for resources inside this weapon. And it's during this that a third element is introduced: a mysterious boy and the sole survivor of the Eldridge crash, Abel, who we mentioned before. He comes into contact with the Zohar by chance. Yeah. How much of this happens by chance, right?
Who knows?
But as a result of this, the original Elheim is created with a built-in dual will: the weapon and the contact.
Right. So the wave existence responds to this earnest wish of the boy by giving her a mother's will, giving Elheim specifically a mother's will, and responds to System Hawa within Persona by imbuing Deus's will, known as Mia or Miang. So again, conflicting wills, and the wave existence will kind of goes into Elheim, and Deus's will becomes personified through Mia or Miang. So while we don't really know why Abel is drawn to come into contact with the Zohar, it is heavily implied that Abel was fated to become the contact, a term that will crop up much more as we dive into the story of the Xenogears game.
Right. And one might ask, like, in a sci-fi universe like this, what does it mean for something to be fated? As you recall before, we discussed the Zohar as a phenomenon manipulation machine, and there's a lot of details on how it does that. But basically, every moment has its possibilities, and the Zohar is capable of collapsing those into the possibility that is intended by whoever's using it. And we do have a little bit of a diagram I'm sure we will display here that kind of shows that a little bit. It's a little bit beyond the scope of keeping it going with this retrospective, but it's very fascinating. The point is, the Zohar is able to grant wishes. And so how much of this was chance and how much of it was fate? In my opinion, Abel was definitely fated to become the contact. The wave existence used the Zohar to make it happen. That's also why he survived.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if the wave existence hadn't been present, Kodamini would likely have only activated System Hawa with the sole purpose of resurrecting Deus. However, because of this entanglement, Elheim actually ends up with a dual will, which is what we've been alluding to with the whole Elheim and Miang thing. The easiest way to explain it would be to say that Elheim, known as the antitype, represents the off state of Deus, while Miang, the complement, basically to the contact, represents the on state. So after the crash of the Eldridge, the original Elheim held both states within herself. She was whole and had both of these things inside her. But in the form of Miang, she creates the first humans on the planet, the Gazel, led by Cain, whose entire purpose is to contain the Animus. 13 humans in all were created as the first batch.
Right, and they're essentially living components in Deus's reconstruction.
Right, and once Elohim is satisfied with this, or Miang, if you will, she returns to the molecular construction plant and is divided into two entities, who we come to know in the game. One is Miang Hawa, from System Hawa, of course, and she carries the will of Deus, and Elohim, who carries the will of the wave existence in the form of Abel's earnest wish. So together, the three of them, Abel, Elohim, Miang, become the most advanced humans on the planet.
Right, and Abel, Elohim, and Miang are all bound by a cycle of reincarnation, which we'll see a lot of in the Xenogears as well. Each life carries fragments of memory from the previous one on a genetic level. So to kind of break it down, and as a bit of a small recap, each of these three play a specific role. So Elohim is the main body of Deus. She's fated to become the last Miang and is programmed to merge back with System Hawa's incarnation on the Day of Resurrection and reform Deus. It's a final merging of God and machine, but until such a time, she is reincarnated and carries the same name, and she becomes known as the Antitype. Miang, conversely, is the supplemental body of Deus. She carries its will and contains a factor that is present in DNA of all women born on the planet. She's able to control the bodies of any woman at will for the purpose of eventually merging back with the main body, Elohim, and manipulating events to reform Deus. She is referred to as the complement, like we said before, or the supplement. And then finally we have Abel, who is the only survivor of the Eldridge crash and carries the will of the wave existence. He's destined to destroy Deus and the Zohar to allow the wave existence to finally reascend to its own dimension and, oddly enough, to save humanity. He's referred to as the Contact.
Right. And, another interesting note about this in particular, the Contact has a couple of different names within history. Anonelbe is one of them, the Man of God, if you will. And as these are all beings that reincarnate, it is important to understand that Elohim and Abel have kind of a natural type of reincarnation. They come up when they come up. Miang, because her factors within all women and is Deus's will, right, acting within humanity, she can reincarnate whenever she wants, and she often does. And
right.
So she's far more prevalent throughout history. So, without further ado here, you may be asking, how does any of this happen with the wave existence? Well, we're going to talk about the Path of Sefirot now. So, once again, feel free to pause, get a snack if you need. This is going to be some heavy stuff.
And we will try to be as accurate in the way we pronounce things and in what we are representing, but these are fairly complex topics that we are not experts in. So, grain of salt.
Yes. Yeah. I have done some research on Jewish mysticism, which was what we're talking about here, really. But we make no guarantees that the tense will be correct or the pronunciation will be 100% correct. We're going to do our best with it. Sefirot is plural, Sephira is singular, I believe. But yeah, so to discuss the wave existence falling from its higher dimension to the material plane and getting stuck, trapped within this cage of fleshly existence of Zohar. How exactly does that happen? How does a primordial, transcendent being fall through dimensional space? So, without further ado, we will talk about the Path of Sefirot now.
Right.
Let's go.
Yeah, and I said a minute ago, we'll try not to get too bogged down in the weeds because this does contain a lot of complex concepts, and we don't have the time or, frankly, knowledge to cover that great depth. However, it is important to go over it because it is an essential part in understanding the narrative and themes of this game. The Path of Sefirot comes up a lot, and to understand the wave existence, we have to have at least a rudimentary understanding of the Sefirot.
Exactly. So, to explain what the path is, in Kabbalah, which is a school of Jewish mystical thought, the path, the Sefirot and the Path of Sefirot are described in the mystical text Zohar as emanations of the divine. And Zohar, of course, is the name of the MacGuffin in Xenogears, if you will. The 2001 Space Odyssey monolith with the eye, the infinite energy engine, named after this Jewish mystical text. So there are a total of emanations. There are a total of 10 emanations in which Ein Sof, or infinite space, reveals itself and continuously creates both the physical and metaphysical realms through emanations of the Creator's will. The word Sefirot is derived from a root word in Hebrew that forms the basis for the words book, story, number, and sapphire.
And as a side note, the Zohar in Xenogears has a blue gem inlaid into its eye, which contains the biological computer Kadamini. Sapphire.
Get it? Get it? Yeah, exactly. So, Ein Sof is typically translated as infinity or endless. It represents a formless state of the universe before God self-materialized or became knowable. The Sefirot emanate from above to below. What that means is that the highest Sephira are the most abstract and the least comprehensible to the human mind, with the lowest Sephira considered to be the closest to the material world and therefore the most understandable in concrete terms.
Right. So in hopes of trying to explain this a little better, I'm going to try and break this down a little. There are 4 worlds associated with the metaphysical, right? So we have the world of emanation, which is the most complete emanation of Ein Sof, that infinite space, right? Unified with its source and divine wisdom predominates. It's the best place. Next, we have the world of creation. Creation ex nihilo, or out of nothing, where souls and angels are self-aware, but they lack form. So we have divine intellectual understanding that predominates. Then we have the world of formation. Creation relates to form. The divine emotion predominates. And then finally, we have the world of action, where creation relates to the physical aspect, continuously forming the lowest world and all of its creatures, right? So divine kingship predominates here. Creation is granted purpose. In tandem with this, there are Sefirot that are expressed in all worlds, with higher Sefirot taking precedence in the higher worlds, and lower Sefirot dominating the lower worlds. The lowest of which is said to be the only one where it is even possible to deny the existence of the divine. These Sefirot have dual meanings, from high to lower, and are expressed in an outer function of divinity and an inner experience of the soul. So, starting from the top and working our way down, essentially, we have Keter, and Dan, please feel free to correct any mispronunciations if I get it wrong. But we have Keter, which is the outer expression is crown and faith, and then, is crown. And then faith, delight, and will are the inner experience of the soul, right? And then we've got, I believe it's pronounced Chachma, which is wisdom, outer, and selflessness is inner. We have Banah, which is understanding, outer, and joy is inner. And we have Da'at, which is knowledge, best understood as another aspect of Keter. One and the same, kind of a hidden Sephira, and that's the outer expression. And then union is the inner experience. And then we have Chesed, I believe, or Chesed, which is loving kindness. That's that outer expression. And the love of the divine, which is the inner. Then there's Gevura, which is the might and severity, which is outer. And then the inner is fear and awe. Tiferet, beauty and harmony is outer. Mercy and compassion are inner. Netzach, victory and eternity are outer, and confidence is inner. Hod, or Hod perhaps, splendor and thanksgiving are outer, and sincerity and earnestness are inner. And then we have Yasad, which is foundation, outer, truth, inner, and Malchut, kingship, outer, and divine presence, inner.
Outstanding. Yeah, so I want to take a second and say, well done on that. That's a lot of Jewish words there, Jewish mysticism terms. Yeah, as far as I know, you got those all correct, or at least very, very close to correct. So yeah, those are tough, but yeah, good job. And yeah, just to talk a little about outer and inner before we kind of continue here. The basically, the idea here is that the divine and the human soul are believed to both be reflections of all aspects. So when we're talking about the outer, that is the divine, and then the inner is the human experience of that. And so the idea is that the human soul experiences the same Sefirot differently than the divine does, but they're still experiencing the same reality, in a way. Why is these details? Why are these details important, and why aren't we just saying, "Oh yeah, it just uses this weird, obscure thing"? There's a reason they did this. This is a very thematically important thing to understand about Xenogears and some of the things that happen. So the idea here is that these experiences mirror each other and are in constant conversation. Because of this, the path of Sefirot can be understood as a route to transcend or advent to and from the divine. It is both the inner psychological and spiritual process, as well as the divine emanations of reality simultaneously. So in Xenogears, the path of Sefirot is used very literally in one aspect. We're talking about this higher dimension existence that descends the path and wants to reascend it, basically to go home to its home dimension. But it's important to understand the aspect of the human and divine reflecting each other to truly understand this story. To interact with the wave existence is to interact with oneself. In a way, this interaction is a mirror that leads to enlightenment, as what is unknowable becomes knowable through the divine relationship. And so that's one of the better ways to understand the wave existence itself, and what the mechanism is for how it's even here and interacting with us to begin with, right?
Right. And if that's still confusing to you, that's okay.
Yep. Yeah. I think to sum it up, it is a metaphysical path that this thing descends and reascends, and you just need to keep in mind, if you're discussing something with the divine, you're really talking to yourself in a way in this world. It's very interesting. But yeah, I think we've covered that as well as we can, and I'm sure we'll have things on the screen here that are showing these things. So the path of Sefirot. But I encourage you, if you're interested in it, look into Zohar. There's resources all over the place about it if you want to understand it better.
Right.
This is not a video about the path of Sefirot, but it is important to understand it and this world.
Right.
So, without further ado, I think we'll go into episode 2 here, the Time of Genesis.
Good. I need a break. Whew, my brain hurts.
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to hit basically early history on this planet. So, as we discussed before, System Hala activates, and it gives birth to the planet's first native sentient beings, aside from Elohim and Abel.
Right, and if you remember our discussion from last time, earlier, 10 minutes ago, I don't know. Elohim is the incarnation of Persona, right? So this is a core living program from the biological supercomputer Kadamini. And Abel is the sole survivor of the crash involving the starship Eldridge, and technically an alien on this planet.
Right. So System Hala creates Cain, the first native human. He is given an undying and ageless body, instilled with the power and responsibility to manage the other humans for the express purpose of reconstructing Deus. If you know your theology, Cain, Abel, the first humans coming from the Creator. Yeah, right? Shocking. Yeah. Talk about all this obscure mysticism and then just basic Cain and Abel. Yeah. Yeah. So, after Cain, the system also creates the Gazel. The Gazel are a congregation of 12 less powerful but still ageless humans who are imbued with the power of Animus to seek the scattered anima relics on the planet.
Right, and so just another brief reminder, because again, it's dizzying, I'm sure, at least it was for me when I was writing this all down. But anima is the set of organic components that comprise the biological computer Kadamini. Hopefully you're starting to see how this all kind of interconnects. They were scattered across the planet during the crash of the Eldridge. Animus is the neurological counterpart to the anima and is meant to guide humanity back to the reconstruction of Deus.
Exactly. So, as humanity multiplies, Cain begins to be venerated as the advent of God. And this is a belief that is encouraged by Myong as the living embodiment of Deus's will. She views it as a useful means toward the ends of resurrecting Deus.
Right. And it doesn't take long for conflict to arise. Cain desires to bring about the resurrection of Deus, but Abel believes that humans should live according to their own will. And because of this belief, he ends up rebelling against Cain's rule as a human god. Cain's response to this? Violence. Cain attempts to squash Abel's rebellion by murdering him. However, Elohim throws herself in the way and was killed instead. And having murdered the main body of God, because remember, Elohim and Myong are two parts of the same entity, right? So having murdered the main body of God, Cain would spend the rest of his life desiring to find some way to atone for this mistake. This is the original sin, quote unquote, of this planet.
Right. Yeah, and that is one thing to understand about Elohim and Myong. Myong represents more of the will of Deus and is the supplement. Elohim, besides having the influence of the way of existence, is the main body of Deus, the main body of God. So yeah, this is about all we know about episode 2 at this point. It is a very, very brief section, and we do see some scenes from this in the game, and we are told about it, but we also have a couple of details such as creation of the Gazel ministry and how that happened within Perfect Works here. But what matters is Cain would seek basically to atone for his sin for the rest of his life. And as you recall, he's immortal. He can't die. He's the most powerful human. So from here, we fast forward 6,000 years. We don't really know a lot about what happened in the intervening 6,000 years. It is interesting that it's 6,000 years for a few reasons, but episode 3 occurs in the time of the Zeboim culture. So this is the civilization that arises on the planet after the time of Genesis. So at this point, humanity has reached an intellectual peak and has evolved into an advanced technological society. However, human lifespans are drastically shortened during this period due to inborn genetic flaws, probably from genetic engineering, and widespread radioactivity from experimenting with, splitting the atom, all of that.
Right, yeah. When we see it in Xenogears, and we can talk about this more in detail later, but it feels a little bit more parallel to our own modern experiences right now. And it's important that we keep an eye on the main 3 entities that we just talked about last time, right? So Myong is actually embodied within twin sisters at this time. This iteration of her is numbered somewhere in the 600s. The exact number is
reported differently in 3 different places in Perfect Works.
Within
one of
Perfect
which says
Works
061. Yeah.
Right, yeah. But we believe it to be somewhere in the 600s. Unlike the other 2, like we talked about before, she seems to have incarnations every generation. But the Contact and the Antitype seem to only have specific times when they will incarnate. And so the Contact of this era is Kim. He's a scientist who is researching nanotechnology and molecular machines. And then Elohim, or the Antitype, because remember, she keeps the name regardless of when she incarnates. The Antitype of this era works at a federal hospital as a nurse, of all things. Eventually, she will end up meeting with Kim, and they form a romantic relationship.
Right. So during this era, Myong and the Ministry, in the meantime, the current governing body, consisting of Cain and the Gazel, reached the conclusion that humanity has become defective and unsuitable for Deus's reconstruction. As a result, they make plans to incite an all-out nuclear war with the intent to destroy the population and rebuild in the aftermath. At the same time, an anti-government terrorist group known as Ravine has become a problem for the Zeboim society. One of their missions caused the federal hospital to lose power and caused widespread social upheaval. This power loss specifically resulted in a young girl under Kim's care losing her life, which changed him.
Right, yeah. It should come as no surprise that Kim rejects Ravine's attempts to recruit him after this. No doubt he blames them for the death of the girl and wants nothing to do with them, and rightfully so, in my opinion.
Right. So this kind of changes the trajectory of Kim's life a little bit. His research into nanotech is considered to be heretical by the Zeboim government and is thus suppressed and censored. But Myung catches wind of this, and she has other ideas. She secretly sponsors Kim's efforts in hopes of using it later for her own purposes. So his research leads to the creation of Emeralda. And Emeralda is a nanomachine colony that takes the shape of a young girl. Because the Elohim of this era cannot have children of her own, Emeralda essentially becomes the daughter she has with Kim.
Right. And their joy, while great, would not last long, unfortunately, because Myung attempts to seize all of Kim's research, including Emeralda. And this attempt at seizure actually leads to the tragic death of Ellie, yet another person that Kim has cared about lost to violence. And once again, the cycle continues. As a result, Kim seals himself and Emeralda into his secure research facility, which permanently prevents anyone from ever getting their hands on his work.
Right, and you may start to see a theme here. Ellie threw herself in front of Abel to save his life.
Right. Ellie
was trying to help Kim, lost her life. Not good. Unfortunate life, being the anti-type. So, soon after this, Kim and Emeralda disappearing from history. There's no way to get to them. Not long after, full-scale nuclear war breaks out. Nuclear and biochemical weapons devastate the surface of the planet, and 90% of the human population is lost. The resulting nuclear winter sets in for thousands of years. At some point, though, during this, the genetic laboratories of the Zeboim civilization release their animal specimens, which give rise to the Choo-Choo race.
Sorry,
yeah.
Choo-Choos are just...
Yeah, no.
They're really funny.
If you've played Xenogears, you understand why he's laughing. Yeah, Choo-Choos are hilarious. Yeah, they're a little more than basically, advanced kind of laboratory animals at first, but they eventually evolve into a class of demi-human, which is sort of an umbrella term for, kind of a humanoid that's different from humans. But as you recall, humans are alien to this planet.
Right.
So demi-humans are really the natural inhabitants of this world.
Yeah, and demi-human's not a new term by any stretch. It might have been a little bit more unused at the time of Xenogears' release, but it's not unusual to hear about demi-humans being like these humans that kind of share animalistic traits, sharper teeth, cat ears, that kind of thing.
Used in Chrono Cross as well around this time.
That's true. Mm-hmm. But an additional side effect of this widespread destruction is actually a wide-scale tectonic plate shifts that occur as well. So not only do you have nuclear winter, but you also have basically all of the planet's continents and everything else being shifted around due to these tectonic shifts, which actually ends up causing the Zeboim civilization, what was left of it, to sink to the bottom of the ocean, along with all of their nanotechnology, which it just further pushes Kim's research out of reach.
Right. Yeah. So, not a good time to be living on this planet. All that remains on the surface of the Zeboim civilization is a piece of technology that was designed to launch objects into space. This is known as the mass driver. The mass driver was appropriated by the military as a weapon of war, but post-disaster, it was just left behind on the surface.
I mean, what do you do with it? Can't move it, so...
Exactly.
So all of that kind of helps us transition from the Zeboim age into what becomes known as the Solaris War. Time moves forward another 3,000 years. So for those who are keeping track with the numbers, this means we've covered up to 9,000 years since the Eldridge crashed. Humanity is slowly being reborn. It's during this era that Myong, Cain, and the Gazelle Ministry elders come to the conclusion that humans are ready for the final stage in Deus's evolution. They found the elite nation of Solaris to act as a centralized governing force. It's a change of pace for them at this point, as they had been pulling the strings from the shadows, so to speak, beforehand, but now they're out in the open.
Right. So, in response to the tyrannical governance of Solaris, humanity forms the Anti-Solaris Alliance. And that would, by humanity, I of course mean the surface-dwelling humanity.
Right.
So the Anti-Solaris Alliance is a conglomerate of nations on the surface that have developed their own political machinations and cultural nuances, setting aside their differences to unite against Solaris. One of the primary nations involved in the founding of the Anti-Solaris Alliance, along with other surface nations, is Shevat. If you recall, there's the loading vehicle that was on top of Babel Tower. That's where Shevat's capital is, and most of the civilization of Shevat. So they're able to basically fly around in their floating city, and Babel Tower, the top of it, acts as its base, with the bulk of its people residing within that vehicle at the top of it.
Right. So, like, just kind of echoing this reminder here that the Eldritch had a section listed as Babel, and this is what has become of it after all these years.
Right. So, during this era, in addition to the Anti-Solaris Alliance, this Solaris, and everything that's going on, a religious order known as the Nisan sect is founded by an individual named Adoriel. This sect would become recognized as the kingdom of Nimrod's national church by its fifth king, Kusel Laodicea. So Adoriel is the first abbess of the Nisan sect because of her ability to manipulate ether. I don't think we've talked about ether too much until now, but yeah, basically there's manipulation that is manipulation of energy that some people are capable of that basically looks like magic. This is another ability that comes directly from the Zohar.
It's the Force.
It's the Force, exactly. Or Dragon Ball Ki, you know.
Yeah, ether. Yeah. Some type of magical
yeah.
energy that exists here.
Yep. And it can be very elemental as well. There is an elemental system, but that's
right.
We'll talk about that in the game for sure. So Adoriel is so powerful that she is viewed as a messenger of God. So after the establishment of this Nisan church, there is a bishop by the name of Penuel who founds a convent that this era's Elohim would enter. So Elohim is born in this era, the second of three sisters, and she's born to another bishop over at the Asherah monastery. Yeah,
and also during this era, we have another iteration of the Contact being born on the eastern end of Ignis, which is one of the world's 4 continents, which we can talk about a little more in depth later, but it's just important to know 4 continents, and the current Contact's born on the eastern end of Ignis, which is one of them, and he's known as Lacan. A few other notable people that show up during this time are Rani and Renee Fatima, as well as Shevat's third queen Zephyr, and Krelian, an illegitimate child of Solaris. And we'll cover them a little more in depth later, like I said, but just know that these are very important individuals to keep in mind, as they are prominent figures throughout all of Xenogears as well.
Yep. The one thing to keep in mind about Krelian in particular is his original name before translation was Karelen. So if you are familiar with Childhood's End, you might recognize that name. That's taken straight out of Childhood's End. So when Elohim is 7 years old, she manifests the ability to manipulate ether and is sent to Cardinal Penuel, to be adopted as a future candidate for Holy Mother, the head of the Nisan order. Lacan and Elohim eventually end up meeting when she is recovering from an illness at the Asherah monastery in East Ignis. While there, Lacan would end up gifting Elohim a sketch of herself. At the age of 13, Elohim was selected as the Holy Mother, and her name was changed to Sophia.
Because we really wanted to make things more confusing.
That's right. The antitype's always named Ellie, but this one in particular ended up known as Sophia.
Right.
Her age. It wasn't her true name, but it was kind of her. It's sort of like the Pope takes on a name.
Yeah.
It was sort of her name that way. Her holy name, if you will.
Right, yeah.
So sometime after this, the Nissan sect rebels against the Nimrod Empire because they recognize that they are being used for political gain by the Emperor.
Right. As you can imagine, Emperor Kusel, the leader of Nimrod at the time, was not pleased by this outcome and actually ordered an attack on the Penuel convent in retaliation. And as a part of this attack, Krelian, if you remember I just mentioned him, is sent to assassinate Sophia. However, he can't bring himself to follow through on his directive. He is charmed by her pure smile, and he vows to protect her instead.
So, as a result of all this, the Laodicea dynasty soon falls, and Emperor Kusel is murdered. At the same time, the Nissan sect undergoes several schisms and declines as a result. Meanwhile, Lacan has been traveling and ends up getting involved with the growing rebellion against the government of Solaris, the anti-Solaris alliance. During that time, he meets Krelian, and he believes that Krelian and Sophia are together, as Krelian is kind of a constant presence in her life, is kind of her guard, her guardian at this point. So while Lacan and Elohim do see each other again, there's no reunion, as it's put in Perfect Works. You know, they're not together at this point. He kind of keeps his distance.
Right. And then even more time passes. Sophia becomes the official Holy Mother of Nisan and reforms the sect into what becomes known as the Nisan Orthodox. And underneath these reforms, the tension between anti-Solaris alliance and Solaris continues to climb ever higher, and eventually it turns into all-out war. As a result, Nisan actually ends up becoming a refuge for those who are displaced by the war. It becomes a bit of a sanctuary city for them.
Right. So, as the war is kind of heating up, Lacan and Sophia are reunited, and their relationship begins to slowly become something more. Because Nisan is a place of refuge, Lacan eventually meets Roni and Renee, who he forms a partnership with. As the refugees continue to flee to Nisan, their influence also increases. Eventually, they can no longer be a neutral party in this war and end up siding with the anti-Solaris alliance formally.
Right. Meanwhile, Solaris has begun to build these Soylent facilities across the globe for the express purpose of food production. These facilities secretly doubled as a way to process surface dwellers into suitable biological components for Deus. We can't forget that during all of this, and there's a lot that's been happening, but at the end of the day, Cain and the Gazel ministry are still working toward the resurrection of Deus as their number one priority.
Right. So, yeah, this is an interesting thing. If you have seen Soylent Green, you now know there is another influence from a modern sci-fi work in Xenogears, the Soylent facilities. Exactly. Process food, surface dwellers into suitable biological components for Deus and its food production. What could this food be made of?
Lamb. It's all lamb.
Lamb indeed. So, as all of this as all of these various horrors are occurring, Lacan and Sophia's relationship continues to flourish. At the urging of Krelian, Lacan begins painting Sophia's portrait, and the two fall in love. Between painting sessions, Lacan and his allies begin searching for the anima relics, having learned of the existence of Zohar and its connection to the anima relics. 4 members of Solaris's Gazel ministry, which came from the Gazel, the first humans,
right?
They confront Lacan's group during this time and are met with resounding defeat. This only heightens the conflict between Myong and the Gazel Ministry. Myong openly objects to the Ministry aligning with Anima Relics themselves because they have no ether ability. So ether ability is sort of something that's become more pronounced as humanity has evolved on this planet. The Gazel lack it entirely. So Myong's only desire is to acquire the best possible parts of reconstructing Deus. She doesn't really care about their kind of high opinions of themselves.
Yeah, right.
And this conflict kind of goes from simmering under the surface to becoming public. People realize, oh, wow, the governing people of Solaris are not happy with each other.
Right.
Specifically, the Ministry and Myong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole lot of political intrigue and other things going on along with the actual physical conflict. It's a huge mess. And in the midst of all of this ongoing war with Solaris, Shevat actually attempts to position itself as the new leader of the surface dwellers, as if they weren't dealing with enough, right? They attempted to use the Alliance as a weapon to remove Solaris from the proverbial throne so that they could take over. However, the surface dwellers were stronger than ever due to Nassan uniting the people, and Shevat's play for power failed. They were like, not today.
Negative. So, to bring an end to the war with Solaris, the Gazel Ministry met with the rulers of Shevat and came to an agreement. The Gazel would hand over Myong to be imprisoned in Shevat via carbonite freezing, and Shevat was to see to the dismantling of the Alliance and ensuring Sophia's death in the process.
Right. So the war concludes with Sophia's death as she single-handedly destroys Solaris's flagship Merkaba by ramming her own ship Excalibur into it at full force. Her final words to Lacan were, "Live." Sophia's death ultimately, though, ends up breaking Lacan and Krellian irrevocably.
In two different ways, as we will soon discover.
Yeah.
So from here, we're left in the shambles of war, and this leads to what is referred to as the Day of Collapse. So, with the war over, Rani Fatima discovers a vessel on one of the battlefields that would eventually become known as the Yggdrasil IV. It was one of the vessels that had been loaded onto the Eldridge long ago, along with, the previously mentioned Excalibur, Sophia's ship.
Right.
At the same time, Lacan sets Myong free in Shevat. The death of Sophia has changed him, and his bitter and broken heart leads to him seeking out the Zohar and making contact with it. However, because he is suffering from a fractured mental state, his contact is incomplete, and he becomes Groff.
Right. And then Groff then goes on to awaken Deus's first stage mobile terminal weapons. So these are known as the Diabolos. And what follows is a catastrophic event known as the Day of Collapse. Despite the heroic efforts of a resistance led by Rani Fatima, 96% of the human population is exterminated by these Diabolos. It's yet another extinction level event in this world's very bloody history. And Ronnie and his allies are able to stop Groff, but at a very high cost. Ronnie's brother Rene would end up dying in the final battle while shielding his brother. Afterward, Groff disappears, and his gear, original Veltal, is placed in suspended animation.
The near extinction of humanity only serves to further Myong's objectives here. The strongest of the humans would end up surviving the calamity and thus result in better parts for Deus. This is another reminder that Myong's sole goal is the reunification of Deus for the true battle to come. So there is some sort of hostile power that Deus has been created to destroy, and it's basically seeking to destroy this hostile power after its resurrection, and that's Myong's goal.
Right.
There's some threat out there in the universe that she's after. Knowing the universe we're coming from, it's probably just some other side of some galactic war.
Right.
But it is a threat. It's the reason Deus exists, and it's the reason it's trying to come back together. The Diabolos invasion actually served very similarly to the nuclear winter in the Zeboim era, and basically to refine these human parts and make them better. And another advantage of the invasion is it serves as a simulation of Deus's terminal weapons. What will the battle in heaven look like? Let's test out these Diabolos angels.
Right. So
ultimately, the Diabolos invasion is halted by the activation of the Geisha Key. So as we mentioned previously, Rani, Fatima, and the Resistance basically were able to stop Graf and his goals. But the Diabolos had to be stopped by this artifact known as the Geisha Key. This device was a device originally meant to awaken the pieces of Deus and bring them together on the day of resurrection. However, in this case, it was used as a stopgap to halt the invasion. The Geisha Key remains available for the true day of resurrection after this, when the parts of Deus are deemed worthy.
Right. And so that kind of like the end of the war is what becomes the transitionary period into what will become Episode 5, Xenogears, the game proper. The years following the Day of Collapse see several key moments that define the world as we see it in the game of Xenogears. Nisan is refounded by an individual known as Isolde, who is the daughter of Renee Fatima, and Mother Jacquelinda of Nisan Orthodox. She becomes the second mother of religion. Zephyr and the three sages restore Shevat. Krelian makes contact with Emperor Cain, and with Krelian's help, they move the conscious minds of the Gazel Ministry into a computer known as the Sol 9000, which happens after the death of their bodies during the Day of Collapse. So, just to kind of reiterate how destructive that was, even the Gazel Ministry was affected by it.
That's right, and they became Digimen. Around this time, Roni Fatima founds Av, which is one of the major nations within kind of the time frame of Xenogears. It is the first of the modern surface nations from the Xenogears story. There is another one that we'll cover shortly here. Not long after this, Lacan dies. However, his will lives on, and he is able to inhabit subsequent bodies due to his incomplete contact with the Zohar and his powers as contact.
Right.
So, at this point, he identifies himself as Graf, the Seeker of Power. Meanwhile, Krelian has allied himself with the Queen of Shevat and their leadership, offering life extension treatments to them. His goal is to rule behind the scenes using the church organization that would soon become known as the Ethos.
Yep. And then Kislev is ultimately founded in this era of time that's passing, and it becomes the second of the modern surface nations of the Xenogears story. The years following this, Solaris invades Shevat twice, but there's no real winner between the two, and Krelian ends up placing ether and psychological limiters in the surface dwellers, and he dubs them as lambs.
And with that, we're basically to the current state of affairs when Xenogears begins. We have Av, we have Kislev, we have Solaris in their current state of things, Shevat, and then we have Krelian being just a huge problem at this point.
Right.
So, I know we've covered a lot of ground here in this first part, but this is certainly an attempt to do the world of Xenogears justice here. And so we've covered a lot of history, some of the technology here. There's still plenty to cover, but
right.
Basically this is the start of this retrospective, which is hopefully going to do justice. This world is just so incredibly robust and has such a rich history to it, and there's even more than what we've talked about here.
Yeah.
Check out Perfect Works if you want to know more about it. But yeah, these are the major points here.
Yeah, it's a very big, like, encyclopedic level of book. Perfect Works is certainly worth looking into, and I would argue that going over all of this, even though it's a lot, has only really given me, at least, a deeper appreciation for the story of Xenogears and the themes it's conveying in the narrative.
Agreed, and hopefully you all will agree by the time we finish up this retrospective series. So next time, we're going to be digging into the narrative of Xenogears itself. We're going to go through the whole game, the story, and we're probably going to touch on some of the information that we've already talked about here, because a lot of this is in flashbacks, not all of it.
Right.
Not all of it, but a lot of it's in flashbacks that we see during the game, some in the exposition chair, if you will.
Yeah. That's a mess.
So, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we're going to be making our way through the whole game, the whole story, and related topics in part 2. And then our plan is part 3. We're going to discuss the after times, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and then once all of that is done, we'll take a few moments to actually talk about our own experiences with Xenogears and anything else that we feel like should be stated, anything that could make it into the actual brunt of this, or if there's extra lores or theories that we didn't cover in the topics, that kind of stuff. But until then, thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope, we both do hope, that you enjoyed this content and know that we deeply appreciate your viewership and for sticking with us during the break. So we hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will see you all in the next video.
See you next time.
Bye now. Diddly diddly do 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 do. Thanks for watching.